Member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to share my time here this afternoon with the honourable member from Métis. I would also like to thank the honourable member from Timmins, James Bay, for this motion that we have discussed throughout the day. Today we're here debating a motion that would invite the Pope again to respond to call to action number 58, issued by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to make a formal apology to those that have suffered from their experience in the residential school system. The Pope has been invited by the current Prime Minister and the former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, as well as Canadian bishops, individually but not collectively, to come to Canada, and has not had the opportunity, I might add, in his 5 years that he has been the head of the Catholic Church. The answer, the Pope has said, as for the call to action 58, at this time, I am unable to personally respond. His communique says, given the suffering that some Indigenous children experienced in the Canadian residential school system, the Holy Father expressed his sorrow at the anguish caused by the deplorable conduct by some of the members of the Church, and he offered his sympathy and prayerful solidarity. His Holiness emphasized that the acts of abuse cannot be tolerated in society, and he prayed that all those affected would experience healing. And he encouraged First Nations people to continue to move forward with renewed hope. The Catholic Church has issued many statements of regret, but I have not seen one that says, I am sorry, or we apologize. Pope Francis himself has said inconsistency on the part of the pastors and the faithful between what they say and what they do, between word and manner of life, is undermining the Church's credibility. The Catholic Church was not the lone administrator of the residential school system. There were many others involved, including the Anglican, the United, and Presbyterian churches. Let's look at what each of those had to say over the years. Back in 1993, an apology from the Primate, the Archbishop Michael Piers, to the National Native Convocation reads, I accept and I confess before God and you our failures in the residential schools. We failed you, we failed ourselves, and we failed God. I am sorry, more than I can say, that we were part of a system which took you and your children from home and family. I am sorry, more than I can say, that we tried to remake you in our image, taking from you your language and your signs of your identity. And I am sorry, more than I can say, that our schools, so many were abused physically, sexually, culturally, and emotionally. On behalf of the Anglican Church of Canada, I present our apology. Second, Mr. Speaker, is 1986, the apology to First Nation peoples by the Right Reverend Bill Phipps, the General Council Executive, the United Church of Canada, and it reads, as moderator of the United Church of Canada, I wish to speak the words that many people have wanted to hear for a very long time. On behalf of the United Church of Canada, I apologize for the pain and the suffering that our church's involvement in the Indian residential school system has caused. We are all aware of some of the damage that this cruel and ill-conceived system of assimilation has perpetrated on Canada's First Nations people. For this, we are truly and most humbly sorry. To those individuals who were physically, sexually, mentally abused as students on the Indian residential schools in which the United Church of Canada was involved, I offer you our most sincere apology. You did nothing wrong. You were and are the victims of evil acts that cannot, under any circumstance, be justified or excused. The apology from the Presbyterian Church in Canada was adopted by the General Assembly in 1994. Says in part that we confess that the Presbyterian Church in Canada presumed to know better than Aboriginal peoples what was needed for life. The church said of our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, if they could be like us, if they could think like us, talk like us, worship like us, sing like us, and work like us, they would know God and therefore would have life abundant. In our cultural arrogance, we have been blind to the ways in which our own understanding of the gospel has been culturally conditioned. And because of our insensitivity to Aboriginal cultures, we have demanded more of the Aboriginal people than the gospel requires, and have thus misrepresented Jesus Christ, who loves all people with compassionate, suffering love, that all may come to God through him. For the church's presumption, we ask forgiveness. It goes on to say, we ask for forgiveness for Aboriginal peoples. What we have heard, we acknowledge. It is our hope those whom have been wronged with a hurt too deep from telling will accept what we have to say. With God's guidance, our church will seek opportunities to walk with Aboriginal peoples, to find healings and holiness together as God peoples. These three churches have stood up and admitted they were wrong, and they've asked for forgiveness. They apologized. We have no such statement so far from the head of the Roman Catholic Church. Mr. Speaker, reflecting back on residential schools, it was certainly a very dark time in our country. I remember when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission toured my province of Saskatchewan. I went to one of the hearings. It was a public hearing, as they documented testimony. Story after story was told, some breaking down, others electing not to speak as the scars were obviously too deep to share that day. Mr. Speaker, a couple of weeks ago in this gallery, we honored the actors and the producers of Indian Horse. It's a film about residential school through the eyes of an Ojibwe boy who found his escape by playing hockey. That film actually reminded me of Fred Sacamous. In fact, the producers brought Mr. Sacamous with them that day. Freddie is a residential school survivor. He is a friend of mine. I've known him close to 40 years. We have worked together for many years, raising money for kids' sport, giving others less fortunate a chance to play sports. For those that don't know Fred Sacamous, he was the first Indigenous player ever to play in the National Hockey League. He lasted only 8 games with the Chicago Blackhawks. Why? He became homesick. He needed to return home to Saskatchewan. For years and even decades, Freddie never talked about the residential schools, but later in his life, he has taken a lead role in talking about this in my province of Saskatchewan. He missed his real family, his culture. Now he's a great spokesman for what has happened in the past. I should add, Fred will be invested in the Order of Canada next month here in the city of Ottawa. This is one of our country's highest civilian honors, and Fred is deserving of this honor. In my city of Saskatoon, organizers of the Waugh Heritage Park have a dream. They have a dream that the Pope will someday come to their site and make a formal apology to residential school survivors. They're hoping for this to happen soon, possibly in 2018, 2019. It actually coincides with Waugh being added to Canada's tentative list for World Heritage Sites and reaffirms the importance of this place. The group has already raised over $40 million, Mr. Speaker, in a very short time. They've been working hard to make improvements. This, I ask, will it be the stage for the Catholic Church and the Pope to apologize, to come to my city of Saskatoon and reach out to First Nations peoples? Pope Francis' response to the invitation so far has been very disappointing, but we're still hopeful. But let me leave you with another quote from Pope Francis. He said, "I am always wary of decisions made hastily. I am always wary of the first decision. That is, the first thing that comes to my mind if I have to make a decision. This is usually the wrong thing. I have to wait to assess, looking deep into myself and taking the necessary time. We live in hope, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
I want to thank my honourable colleague for his excellent speech and also for telling us of the survivors who not only survived the trauma but have become role models for our country. And what we see today is how the reason apologies matter is because we have to learn. That's what I was taught by the nuns, some of whom were my aunts. And we learn, and we've learned from each other today because there's still parts of the story that have not been told, but when we tell the story, we understand where we've been and where we're going. I'd like to ask my honourable colleague, because he'd read out all the powerful apologies that had come from each of the various Christian denominations, and he had expressed his disappointment that we don't have it yet from our present Pope. But given Pope Francis's clear vision that he's expressed time and time again about justice, about sometimes even not being worried about the Catholic Church rules because justice overrides rules, if he's confident that what comes out of today, that if we ask His Holiness that we have a Pope who actually is open and understands, does he feel, and I know he wants him to come to the city of Saskatoon. I'd love him to come to the city of Timmins, but I don't think I'm going to get that in this motion, so I left it out. But if he came to Saskatoon, I would totally support it, or any other city. Does he feel that this is a man who would work with us and walk with us and move forward as a nation?
Honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member from Timmins, James Bay. It's interesting because I was on the Saskatchewan school boards for 10 years, and we serve a lot of northern people in our province of Saskatchewan. And I remember when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came through Saskatchewan, as trustees we were told you must attend one of these sessions. It was the most uplifting session I ever had. I talked about it a little bit in my speech because, Mr. Speaker, I had no idea what some of these people have gone through. There has been horrific stories. So remember that day very well at Saskatoon Prairie Land. It was jammed. Probably 7,000 to 8,000 people there. Many lined up. Many, time ran out, wanted to tell their story. We can hope for acceptance from the Pope, Mr. Speaker. We can only hope as time will heal.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Crown, Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his comments today in this debate, and of course continue to thank the member for Timmins, James Bay, for bringing forward this motion to the House. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, when they really put out the calls to action, it was a roadmap. It was a roadmap for so many people that had been hurt in this country through the residential school system. And it was a way that we could all enter this journey of reconciliation together, but more importantly, it was a journey of reconciliation for survivors of residential schools. And I asked the member today, in reflecting on that TRC report and those calls to action, you know, is it your belief and understanding that equally each one of those recommendations are important on that journey and towards that goal of reconciliation for Canadians?
Honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the 94 calls for action is going to take time in this country for each and every one of us to understand. This is one of them, number 58. I think today's debate in the House of Commons has brought forth an awareness of each and every one of us, all 37 million in this country, to have a better understanding of the truth and reconciliation. We spent 6 years putting our testimony together. I remember that day in 2008. I was in a newsroom in Saskatchewan when then Prime Minister Harper held the apology. Many members have talked about, Mr. Speaker, that day in 2008. I remember in the newsroom in Saskatoon, CTV, there were tears. as it was televised that day. Every national network in this country televised that apology. That was an emotional day. You might have had an emotional day here because the leaders were here. But I can tell you, in every location in this country, there were tears shed 10 years ago, 2008.